Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Ms. Coakley, would you call the roll for us?
Mrs. Heinz?
Here.
Mr. Green? Mr. Derman? Mr. Loop? Mr. Harrell? Mr. Nation? Mrs. Richardson? Mr. Winkler? Mrs. Drucker?
Running late.
Mr. Bittencourt? Mrs. Lamy? Mr. Hersey? Mr. Bro? Mr. Kuzan? Mrs. Page?
Would you please rise? Ms. Lamy is going to lead us in the invocation and pledge.
Please bow your heads. Thank you, Father, for bringing us here tonight, Lord. Thank you for keeping us safe. We pray for your wisdom and discernment as we make decisions. Help us to keep our eyes on the truth and always make the choices that are best for the students and our system as a whole. In Jesus' name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for being here this evening. We'd like to welcome you to the public hearing on the St. Tammany Parish School Board budget for the fiscal year 2019-20. This evening is the opportunity for you, the public, to provide input on the proposed budget. A little background on our budgeting process. Our budgets are reviewed each year by our external auditors, Laporte CPA, and business advisors during the course of our financial statement audit. During this audit, the budgets of the school board are reviewed for content, presentation, and for compliance with all requirements of the Louisiana Local Government Budget Act. The Local Government Budget Act, found in Louisiana Revised Statutes 39:1301 through 1315, directs political subdivisions of the state as to the manner in which budgets of the political subdivision shall be adopted, implemented, and amended. The school board strives to be transparent with the budget, and this detailed budget is presented tonight to reflect this. The school board has received no audit findings related to the budget. The school board is also required to submit its budget annually to the Louisiana Department of Education for approval. The school board has received no findings on the budget from the Louisiana Department of Education. As stated earlier tonight, this is the opportunity for the public to provide input on the budget. The board will meet again to discuss the budget at our committee as a whole meeting on September 5th to ask questions and vote to move the budget to the board meeting for September 12th. Members of the public will have the opportunity to comment again before a vote is taken at both the committee as a whole meeting and the September 12th board meeting. Tonight, after a brief presentation, should you have questions, Mr. Foles and Ms. Prevost will be here to respond. So at this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Foles, who will present us with a short budget message.
Thank you, Ms. Heinz. Good evening, Ms. Heinz, board members. As Ms. Heinz mentioned, tonight is our public hearing on the budget. Tonight, I think it's also important to remember that our budget is a year-round, day-to-day budget that we're constantly reviewing, monitoring, and discussing, both as staff as well as with the public. Before we open the floor for public comments, please allow me to share a few slides with you from this year's proposed budget. First off, this is a slide that looks at our school system's revenue sources for the 2019-20 fiscal year. As you can see, we receive over 50% of our funding from the state, about 49% of our funding from local sources, and less than 1% of the federal dollars go into our general fund budget. Next slide shows you how our money is broken down in these three different percentages. Original budget for 2019-2020 is a total of $437 million, with $220 million of that coming from the state, $216.8 million from local sources, and about $500,000 from the federal government. So you can see it's broken down for that way and the difference between each of those from last year to this. Next slide is one that I use all the time when we do presentations across to all the communities, and it talks about how the monies are broken up, and it shows you that 71% of the budget goes to instructional purposes. That is a formula that's designated and done by the state that we report to the state each and every year. 9.7% goes to maintenance of our schools and facilities, 8.3% to transportation, 2.6% to administration, and 2.3% to other services. So we use that a lot, quite a lot in all of our presentations. Wanted to share that with you tonight as well. Some highlights of the budget, some areas that we expect increases. We expect the increase in our ad valorem property taxes of about $3.6 million. That's based upon our latest tax roll provided to us by the assessor's office. I will say, I've said it before, we have a great working relationship with the assessor's office, and we appreciate the communications and the information they share with us and with Terry's office each and every day, and it's helpful in this whole budgeting process. Our tax roll indicates increases in both the number of properties as well as the overall value of all properties. We also continue to have increases in our sales tax revenue, and we have a result of a projected increase in sales tax of $2.2 million. We also continue to monitor our sales tax on a monthly basis, and of course, we'll revise the budget there if necessary. MFP, Minimum Foundation Program, those funds are expected to increase by $8.1 million. And of course, that increase is related to the state funding increase for teachers' salary and support personnel, the money from the state, $5.7 million, as well as the $1.375 increase in the MFP that we have not received in quite some time, so certainly happy to receive that. And that attributed $2.4 million, so the total for that from the state is $8.1 million to be used towards teachers and support personnel pay raises. Expenditures. Here's how we see some of those differences. Of course, our salaries are projected to go up by $12.5 million. This includes employee pay raises, employee reclassifications, and any new employee positions. We also expect approximately an increase of approximately $4.6 million in retirement contributions due to the increase in the salaries. And salaries go up, of course, the retirement and the different contributions go up as well. We did have a slight decrease of 0.7% to offset some of that increase in our retirement cost. Increase in workers' comp of $192,000. Medicare taxes also went up $394,000. We had a decrease, a good thing, a decrease in our funding for property insurance of $600,000 as a result of work that's been done by our central office staff to decrease the insurance premiums and claims over the past few years. Of course, the fiscal responsibility is certainly very important to our school system. We know how important it is, well, to our board and to our public. Our school board retains a AA bond rating, which is the highest of any school board in the state of Louisiana. And our school system has been mentioned nationally, again, for 31 consecutive years for our excellence in financial reporting, as well as the different audits and no findings that Ms. Heinz mentioned to you in part of her opening talk. At the beginning, I talked about our budget being constantly fluid, something that we are constantly working on day by day, and is constantly monitored as well. Updates will be provided to you, to the board, in both December and March, and any time that there's an increase, as you can see in the budget, of 5% or more in revenues, expenditures, or beginning fund balance, Terry and her staff will share that with you as a budget item at a committee as a whole or a full board meeting. Like a little clicker here. Finance report, I want to say a special thank you to Terry and her entire staff. They're here tonight. Much work goes into this effort. Much pride goes into what they do, and I'm proud of them, and I'm proud of the result that you see here. Happy to share it with the public, as well as happy to share it with each of you as board members. So I thank you for your time. Look forward to any questions that might come up tonight, as well as having our board discussion on September 5th and again on the 12th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Foles. Now, members of the public are here. It's your turn. And we would appreciate it if you have questions, if you'd step to the podium, state your name, and then ask your questions. Mr. Broom?
Is Robert Broom from Slidell, and I guess I'll start off the questions for this evening. Let me make sure I was able to go through the budget, and there were several things that I was interested in. Make sure I got my papers together. One of the first things that caught my eye on the budget was that if you compare, this is on the first page, the budget summary, you compare, there's a very slight but noticeable difference, reduction in the total instructional expenditures. It went from like 255 million to 254, just a small amount, but it surprised me. I don't think I've seen that happen very often before. And I was wondering if anyone could comment as to the cause of the reduction in expenditures.
Ms. Prevost? And before you give that answer, I'd like to say I believe Mr. Fultz misspoke when he said the amount that goes towards instruction. He said 71%, but it's 77.1%.
Yes.
So,
The
which
slide
is,
is correct, yes, thank you.
Glad you clarified that. That's right, exactly.
Ms. Prevost, can
Yeah.
you respond to that?
Yes, the slight decrease from actual 2017-18 to projected actual 2018-19 is mainly related to a sharp decrease in our health insurance premiums for the employees. That was 5.5 million. So in the instructional category, it's mostly salaries and benefits, so health insurance is a big part of it. So when that drops, the instruction total will drop, but that doesn't mean we're spending less on instruction. It's just a savings for taxpayers because the cost dropped of the employee salaries.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I did notice on the general fund expenditures by object, I guess page 2, I did see the sharp drop in group insurance. I also noticed there's a $1 million increase in textbook expenditures this year. Always happy to see that. Is that something that we're planning to continue over the next several years, or is it a one-time blip, or what?
Ms. Prevost?
Go ahead.
Well, Ms. Lemaine could probably answer that question better than I, but we are adopting new textbooks, and when we do that, it's more expensive. In years where we just replace textbooks, it's less money, but we've been doing new textbooks for several years now.
So we expect that to continue?
I think it's
probably
all,
next few-
it runs in cycles. Some years are more than others. It depends upon when we have to put them out and how many years and everything like that. So, I mean, I think that's a number you're going to see. But I think you're also going to see as we move down more digital opportunities and less of the traditional textbooks. So I think that's going to have something in play as well with the amount of money that gets spent on that.
Okay, great. And the next comment I had was really just an observation. I noticed that the professional development line increased by a little bit from the previous year, but 250,000. It's still a very small amount considering the number of professionals we have in the system. So just from my personal observation, that's something that the board, I think, could do well to look at over the next year in terms of professional development for the staff.
We have that on our radar, Mr. Broom. Thank you.
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
Most of that increase is for Chromebooks, but I know we do professional development, and Amy could probably jump in more on this, in some of our federal funds. So that's not all professional development we do for the district. That's not the only
Okay.
cost. That's just the general fund cost.
Okay, great.
Also, too, a lot of professional development goes on during the school day in the way of professional learning communities and grade level meetings and planning. So a lot of that is able to be addressed during the school day
Great, thank you.
with no additional cost.
The next thing that caught my eye was on page 7, having to do with a sharp decrease in library aids. And I do understand that that's a local school decision, that, you know, when somebody retires as a library aide, then the principal has to make some hard choices. But it is a big drop, and, you know, libraries, especially in the lower elementary grades, are very important. They're very busy places, for one thing. It's not, go into some of the high schools and they seem to be an archive, but in the lower elementary, they're a busy place, and losing aides has got to be hard on. I know it's a tough choice, but I did notice it.
Yeah, Mr. Jabbia, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the change in duties, the library aides' duties over the years has changed with the addition of software that we have, and a lot of it's electronic in the library. A school gets an allotment of support personnel for their office and library, and it's all together. So if they have an allotment of 3 people, could be a secretary, a bookkeeper, and maybe one of them's a library aide. Through attrition, if the library aide leaves, the principal has the option of replacing that person with a clerical person that they may need rather than the library aide. And a lot of our schools have full-time librarians, so the library aide is not needed as much. Those schools that have a part-time librarian, they usually keep the library aide there so we can keep the library going when that library aide's not in the school. But that's kind of the reason of why the numbers have dropped off from that.
I understand, it's just, I guess I'm old enough to wish that the library, or like the libraries a lot, so. And there was another question that I didn't understand. This is back on page 4. It has to do with project team, or it's a sharp increase, not sharp, I mean, it went from 2 to 6, but an increase in project team, project believe. Could someone explain, I think the increase was mostly in the clerical, but could somebody explain what that project is and why the personnel is changing so much?
Mr. Jabbia,
I can explain.
go ahead, Ms. Rivas.
I believe he's looking from 17-18 to the current. In 17-18, if you recall, we implemented the Project Believe, and that was a part of that year. So it was a full program in 17-18, so you had a full staff added. So that's why you're seeing the increase from those years. You've got more teachers and more, the drill sergeants and the different things. Mr. Jabbia may
That's the
elaborate.
alternative school, Mr. Broom.
And I think what you're seeing is clerical. Our drill sergeants are under that classification because we don't have a job description or pay grade for a drill sergeant.
That's
So
correct.
they come under the clerical rating. So when we hire those particular servicemen to work at Project Believe, that comes under the clerical heading. So that's why you may see that. It's not all clerical. Project Believe and Project Team West only have each one secretary, so it's not 6 secretaries.
I see.
Some of those are actual servicemen, retired military,
So drill sergeants, okay.
drill sergeants. Yes, sir.
All right. Glad I asked, but, okay. Let's see. Please tell me this. Okay, there's a question that I have about the mental health providers. As, let's see, I'm trying to keep everybody following me. I think this is page 6, the mental health providers, MHPs. Basically, the simple question is, we moved them to the Special Security Fund, but some of them, I don't know whether they got left behind or they're new, but anyway, some of them are still in the general fund, so if we could explain that.
We've added 5 MHPs for the RISE program. Those are special education MHPs, so those are not the same type of MHP as the ones that were moved to the school security fund. So those will remain in general fund for the RISE program.
Okay, so those are permanent positions that'll stay in general fund.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, I think I got through the general fund. Would you like me to continue with my questions in the special funds?
Sure,
Or
sure.
okay. If there's anyone else, of course, I'd be happy to yield the floor to others that might have questions. Okay, in one of my first questions was the summer feeding program. It's a very small amount of money, or a relatively small amount of money, but it seems to be growing rapidly, which from my point of view, would be a great thing, but I'm curious to know whether the growth is due to increased costs or increased numbers of students that we're feeding, or what's the story with that?
Terry?
Can I let the food service
Sure.
staff answer that?
Ms. Muntz, would you come to the microphone,
There's
please?
one right here.
Okay. With summer feeding, the length of time that summer feeding has lasted has increased. Also, with breakfast, there's been more schools that have offered breakfast, so that has increased as well.
So it's actually been an increase in numbers of meals served, so that's good.
Which is a great thing.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
Absolutely. Okay, good, thank you. Let's see this, Community Disaster Loan, CDBG is the next one, I guess. Yeah, the Community Development Block Grant. You know, I thought last year we had finished it out, and all of a sudden we spent some more money in it, and now it went from zero spent money, and now it's at zero, so perhaps Tracy, Terry, or someone could explain that.
I can explain it. We were completing the Slidell Pupil Appraisal Project. That was in 17 and 18 and 18, 19. It is complete now, and I didn't budget anything for 19, 20, so we're done with that project
Great.
and the grant.
That was a grant.
Okay. School Activity Fund. Yeah. I guess my last question has to do with the school activities funds, and that's new as the budget explains it, and I'm just curious to know, did the money get all transferred from the general fund? Where did the money come from? And it's now going to be reported here and not in the general fund in the future? Or somebody explain that fund a little bit to me.
Okay, this is a new special revenue fund. These funds are the school revenues and expenditures that are at each school and their cash balances. There is a new governmental accounting standard for this fiscal year that we have to include those monies as a special revenue fund. In the past, they were what's considered an agency fund, so they were not included in our budget. So it didn't come from general fund. It was a budget that we didn't budget those. We're not required by law to budget those. But now they have to be budgeted and they have to be reported in our financial statements. We're still receiving guidance, waiting for guidance from the state and from the Department of Education on detailed reporting for that. So that's why it's a very summary budget at this point.
Okay.
So we thought it was important to go ahead and get it started, even though the state hasn't told us exactly what it should include. We wanted to get it out there, and then we'll have to adjust once we hear from the state.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's good news. We'll be interested in tracking that in the future then. Thank you very much. Okay, those are my questions. I appreciate it and learned a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Broom, appreciate that. Would anyone else like to come forward and ask questions? No other questions? All right, then I'd like to remind you all that we will review the budget again at the committee as a whole meeting and the full board meeting. And you're welcome to be here to ask questions before we take a vote. And thank you all for being here this evening. I declare the meeting adjourned.